Good afternoon, and welcome to a very special edition of the Florida Family Law Attorney Podcast. For those of you that don't know, my name is Mary Virga, and I am Gerard's wife. And today we are going to flip the script on Gerard. We are going to ask Gerard the questions. So instead of Gerard interviewing guests today, I'm going to put him in the hot seat with questions from our community, our friends, and quite frankly, questions that I've been dying to ask him close to 10 years of marriage. So welcome, Gerard, to your own podcast and being in the hot seat. How are you today?
Good.
Good. Do you feel a little nervous?
No, I can't admit to that, but yes, I do. Yeah, it's a little bit different being on the other side of this.
Isn't it true that you love to be cross-examined by your wife?
Might have to take the fifth.
So with all seriousness, we thought we would try something a little different and fun. And I'd like to ask Gerard some fun questions today, but I often, as a non-lawyer, whether it's in the pickup line or with my friends on a girls' night, hey, what would Gerard say about this? And obviously I don't give legal advice because I did not go to law school and Gerard obviously has, and he's the experienced one here. But sometimes often we have questions that come up like, how would this be handled or how would that be handled? So we just thought we would try something new. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get right to the chase. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Gerard, I know we talked about this before, but obviously we co-parent. I'm a stepmom. I'm so proud of all of the kids. And we were just talking earlier about how fast they're growing, talking about how many summers were left. And, that brings me into time sharing and going back and forth. And basically, my first question is going to be, what's the biggest difference between giving legal advice about co-parenting and
Well, that's one of the things I've tried to kind of build into my practice is, when you're a lawyer or you're a law student, things may look really good on paper. You can have the perfectly legally binding drafted agreement with every provision in there, but it's very hard to have an agreement or any type of understanding where it handles all scenarios and it handles the future. And even if you're a good lawyer and you've thought these things through for your client, nobody's got a crystal ball to predict all the future events. And then, as you said, kids grow, needs change, schedules change, people might get a new job or have other new obligations in their life. That's, to me, you have to realize that as a lawyer. And if you're living it, you have to realize people are people.
Mhm.
And you may want them to answer a certain way. You may want them to handle things a certain way. But in reality, people are people and they're not perfect and they're not lawyers and they're living their lives. And so I think, as a parent who is a co-parent and is in a family like ours with now, you and I and the kids have a brother, I think, always trying to maintain that flexibility and, realizing that there's going to have to be times where you have to be flexible with the agreement.
Mhm.
And I try to live by this and I try to tell clients this too, even though sometimes it may be challenging, is a good agreement is one that ends up in the desk drawer and people forget about it. And people look at me like, why? Why am I paying you and going through all this to get an agreement that ends up in the desk drawer?
Mhm.
But, if there's a big issue, maybe it needs to get pulled out the desk drawer. But on the day to day, just learning how to co parent where, hey, this is my time, this is your time. Hey, I realize that your family is coming into town. Let's switch the weekend. Let's do this. And learning just how to cooperate
Absolutely.
again, because, at some point they probably were cooperative if they had kids together and were married. But sometimes that cooperation, unfortunately, is broken down. But hopefully that agreement is a seed for goodwill and rebuilding it because there are rules in case, like, someone really gets out there, you can say, no, that's not what the agreement says. But
Mhm.
trying to do that. And I think that, people, it's hard sometimes and it takes time, but, flexibility and understanding and, putting the kids first, it may be your weekend, but they haven't seen their uncle in 6 months. Then, make a switch, switch it out, take them to the zoo the following weekend or whatever you have planned. But it's definitely an ongoing continuum that
Absolutely.
you're dealing with. And then emotions. I have a personal rule that I try to follow, and I've told clients this as well. If something looks like it's going to get heated, try to not communicate for a minute. Write down your thoughts, reflect on your thoughts,
The act
If
of
you have a new, if you have sir or anybody in your life that's trustworthy, and have them read it, make sure it sounds good, make sure that the emotions are not running high. And it's kind of funny because I was talking to someone who's a representative for My Family Wizard, which is a platform now, an app that people can use to communicate with their co-parent, do calendaring.
Mhm.
And I think now that they have an AI function built in that's a tone monitor.
Oh,
So if
yes.
the tone sounds accusatory or
Mhm.
negative or hostile, that the AI catches it, flags it, and tries to warn you. I'm not sure if it redrafts it yet, but I'm sure it's on the way if it's not already there. So,
I think
uh,
that's I think that's great. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's just kind of my advice: flexibility, getting past your differences, and honestly, trying to have a sense of humor about it all, and trying to cooperate.
I think it also goes back to mainly communication and really, like you said, the art of just pausing and reflecting. And I know one of the things that I've heard you tell clients throughout the years is whatever you text, whatever you say, whatever you email, think about it being in a binder in front of a judge in a courtroom. And think about how, at the end of the day and years to come, how it's going to make the kids feel and what's in their best interest. So I think if you prioritize what's in the children's best interest, and then you also prioritize, like you said, being calm, communicating, I mean, let's be real. I'm always the emotional one in our marriage. You're always the pragmatic one. And I have many people tell us, I don't know how you guys work sometimes because he can be so just, you always have the solution and you're so driven. And I tend to get a little hysterical, emotional. And, that's, I think typical for a woman my age, maybe not to stereotype. And it's probably me. I'm just a sensitive soul. But I think that if we check ourselves and you have that balance, like you and I, like with that yin and yang, and I'll often ask you, like you talked about the AI, like checking yourself and the tone meter. Hey, Gerard, am I being too sensitive or emotional about this? Or you'll ask me, hey, honey, am I being a jerk here? And, we often joke. I'm like, well, you probably could have put a little sugar there. You probably couldn't have sweetened it a little bit. But I do love that. And I know that we have Rebecca appearing on the podcast. I think it's on Thursday. I'll have to double check the calendar, but I know we're really looking forward to having her for our family wizard and going back to the communication. And whether it be through a platform like that where you do communicate with co-parenting, it's so important. And I think that the kids ultimately, they feel it, they sense it. And one of the things I always think about as a step parent is when my stepchildren look back on it all, I want them to know, hey, she really tried as far as communicating and putting us first. And you definitely have to put away all of any of your emotional stuff and really just focus on what's going to make them happy. And as you talk about their best interest.
I think what's funny, as time has gone on, the older two children have become teenagers and almost adults now. And I think it's funny when they see me communicating with their mom and either by text or in person and that we're getting along, because I think teenagers sometimes like the idea of mom and dad are not on the same page. And maybe they think that the divorce or family law cases cause such a rift that they can't communicate and they can't co-parent. They're going to perhaps take advantage of that. And then when they see that that's not the case, like it's kind of a
Yeah.
funny, like deer in headlights look of, oh,
Yeah.
they are talking and I'm not going to get by
Oh
with that.
no.
And and you can't blame them. Kids are kids, teenagers are teenagers. I did far worse when I was a teenager than them.
Mhm.
But I think it's funny, in that regard. But
I always tell them, don't parent shop. The same thing with, with co-parenting. It's like, whoa, 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 hold on. But yeah, that could be a whole other episode just on teenagers. So I usually, tell my girlfriends, pray for me, with, with the teenagers, and
yeah,
they're great. Ours in particular are outstanding, of course.
I've been surprised how many times I've heard, well, it's going to happen over there. I'm doing it over there, to text and find out there's no way that's going on. But,
Exactly. Yeah,
kids will be kids.
going back to, like you said, the communication and having that relationship and pausing. So for sure, without a doubt. So I'm gonna ask you some personal questions. Are you ready?
I guess so.
All right. Well, we'll kind of shift the gears a little bit. So if you could give yourself some advice, whether it be legal advice or advice in general, what would you give yourself, Gerard Virga?
Going back on it, and over the years, I would think that, the advice I'd probably would give myself is, maybe stop and enjoy a little bit more of life. I think the older I've gotten, I'm 48 now. that I realized it's a short life, and, cherish the moments you have with your kids when they're young, spend more time, doing those things. I read a Facebook post the other day, and it was geared toward lawyers. I think it said something like on the tombstone, nobody's going to see on your tombstone or say at your funeral how many motions you won. And I think as a lawyer, if you're passionate about your topic, it can become consuming. I think that happens to a lot of us as lawyers. And I think that, really, I think recently there's been a lot more mindfulness of after certain hours, not looking at the phone, not checking the emails, and a little bit more toward like mental health, personal relationships,
Mhm.
and maybe I guess what they call work life balance now is a new term. But I think that's, some advice I would give myself going back on it. Not really like legal advice, but to do my job better, I think I would have probably, everybody's got college loans. I doubt I could have afforded this, but taking more psychology and more accounting courses. If I knew I was going to be a family law attorney, because I do think that, being able to offer more in those regards would be really beneficial to our clients. I feel like I've gotten an alleyway degree in psychology and accounting, the hard school knocks of learning through family law, but that's something I would have done because family law really does affect children's psychology. You got the mental stress and the psychological impact it's having on your client.
Mhm.
And then, of course, with equitable distribution, alimony, those things, I think, really, accounting is high up there. And I work with an accountant a lot in a lot of the higher asset cases, and I've learned the language, but just being better at that stuff would make me better at my job. I
Mhm.
think if I had it all over do again, I would have maybe before kids taken some more classes in those to just bolster up my understanding and learning.
That's interesting that you should say that because I do feel as if my observations throughout the office that everyone here wears so many hats. Like you said, you're playing counselor, you're playing accountant, you're playing nurse, it's the roles are endless. So you really do have to be adaptable to that case. And like you've said over and over, it's not just what's on the docket. There's families there and each one is so different.
Yeah, and look, as a lawyer, our profession, our ethics is of course on, legal results,
Mhm.
and it's on, representing your client in court and objecting and filing the right paperwork and all those things. But in family law, I think it's a lot of focus on the person.
Absolutely.
Every person has a different need. And I'm not talking about a legal need, but an emotional need of did they really want this? Are they the
Mhm.
spouse that didn't want this to happen? Are they are they have they reached the realization that it needs to happen, but they're coping with less time with their children because no time sharing plans really give you what you truly want, which would be to see your kids 100% of the time. It's a lot of factors, and honestly, I think, the longer I do it, it's just spending more time with the client and trying to get to know 'em.
Sure, and that's one of the things you've always said since I've known you is that these are all really good people. They're just going through the most terrible times in their lives. And you see that and but going back to what you said about the work-life balance, and I'm gonna rat her out for a moment. Our business manager, we were going over the calendar and she said, "Wait a minute, is he really going to be out? Is he really going to be out?" And, it was like, yeah, yeah, he is because, every July we take a family trip. And, I often joke that, even in the hospital or if you're getting blood work done or, your phone is there and you truly are exceptional with that. And I've always said that as your wife, I see it 24/7 how you are there for clients. I mean, we're on an anniversary trip and you're on the phone in the pool, making sure, but you always make that a priority. And without a doubt, you're always there. I do think that sometimes taking a couple moments, like I know that we've had dinner and it's been, okay, put your phone down because, uh, you know,
I
uh,
didn't always say I lived up to it. I didn't
no,
always say I lived up to it.
you don't, but hey, the AP scores are in and somebody has something to tell you or, put it down. But or even, joking with you and I in our marriage. And I'll say, well, did I lose you? I mean, how many times a week do I say that? And you're like, no, I'm right here. I'm right here. But so-and-so just had this order, da, 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 da. And it's the lawyer talk. And it's like, okay. And then once I realized that there's a serious issue that someone's child is being taken away across the state line, or, I do get those sense of urgencies and emergencies. And obviously that goes with the fact how you do put the clients first.
Well,
But
it's like it's hard. It's hard to balance both. I don't care who you are. It's hard to balance both because you love your family and you love your time with your family, and that's always your priority. But you have people who really they hired you to represent them on these cases. They put their trust in you, and that's something I take very serious, that that they put their trust in me, and no matter what the facts are or how it shakes out, when I go to bed at night, I want to be able to put my head to the pillow knowing I gave it everything I could have given it, on that case, and that I've, thought about everything. And, if anybody knows me, I'm a kind of a quiet, normally introspective guy.
Mhm.
And I'll be thinking, lots of times in my own head, trying the case numerous different ways, or thinking what the comebacks are going to be from the other side,
Mhm.
and living in your own head with those. And then, there's always cases that you've won that you were surprised you won.
Mhm.
And there are cases you thought you were sure to win and you didn't win. And then, dealing with those, like those do haunt you, no matter who you are. If any good lawyer, football coach, whatever you are, you learn from those events and try to get better and better with every attempt that you make at it. And
Mhm.
I had a law school professor, I never will forget this. He was an older guy. He was up at the podium. It was during our orientation. Everybody in the room is scared to death of what did I get myself into? And he said, the law is a jealous mistress. Everybody's looking at him like, what is this old guy talking about? And what does he mean by this? And after practicing 20 years, it's a jealous mistress. If you take a vacation, yes, you'll be gone from the office, but those cases will be progressing without you. Things will be happening, life events will be occurring. And when you come back from the vacation, you're going to have to address them. So, personally, I kind of live life with the approach of, if it's a small fire in the beginning, it's a little brush fire, go
Mhm.
run to the fire and put it out
Mhm.
before it becomes an inferno. So, I would rather, from a time management standpoint, every day deal with the issues that I can deal with and try to smother those out for my client than to let it become an inferno. And I think sometimes in family law, I was listening to somebody from the Florida bar who was talking about mental health and lawyers, and that there's a tendency with lawyers sometimes to, for instance, the client's calling, they have an issue, and the client doesn't call, and the attorney doesn't call back, and how that can become a real problem over time if it's not addressed with that particular situation. And the mental health person said it's actually sometimes a mental defense of being overwhelmed and self preservation. But I could see how you could think that. But my philosophy has always been run to it, put it out before
Mhm.
it gets bigger, because, it's much easier to deal with a small problem than a big problem. So
Well,
I
I
would
think
rather do
too
that.
I think that's great advice, and I think too, not to interject, but going back to the psychology of it all, I think that if I personally were going through a family law issue, not only would I want my attorney and my paralegal to be holding my hand and here's the Kleenex and being there and being a friend, but knowing they're going to fight for me as well. And we've always talked about that balance. And I think there's such an extraordinary team here at the law firm, without a doubt. And going back to the communication, I'll brag on our office for a moment about, the communication we have here and constantly touching base and the back and forth, because I think during a family law case, you need that. I mean, not only for the, hey, I have a legal question, but hey, is this okay to do? Or yeah, you have to have that communication.
Well, communication it's good. It's definitely required. It's a necessary component to getting to know your client, knowing the facts, and moving the case forward. Here at our firm, we use the Clio portal. I like the portal approach to the communication. I prefer it even to the phone. And the reason I do that is because it creates a good record. I can go back and review the record of what we talked about as I'm getting ready for your case, maybe a hearing. It also allows the paralegal to be in the communication in the portal. So if I'm in court, they can maybe chime in and say, hey, he's in court, but what can we do? Or let me get you on the calendar. So I think those are good things. I think technology is really changing the way we communicate because
Sure.
obviously I'm not so old that I don't remember the phone, We always had phone calls, but it used to be that communications with the court and with lawyers were always in mail. It was
Mhm.
mailed by snail mail. And now I think with communication, it's good, but it used to take a little more investment of time and effort to write a letter, get it to the post office, get it stamped, get it out, or, and now, with 24-hour communication, electronic communication, sometimes you have to balance out when too much communication is bad.
Mm.
Um, and is it necessary communication? Because sometimes what I see with clients, this is conversations that is not just in family law, but if you have a contract that's billable hour, and there's communication after communication, you can rack up a pretty sizable bill.
Sure.
I think the best way to perhaps communicate is one thorough message with
Mhm.
a lot of the points in there, as opposed to follow up, little small question, small question, small question. And those are usually easier to handle as a lawyer. I can sit down and answer 4 or 5 of these things, these points, in one well thought out message, as opposed to smaller messages. But I don't think smaller messages are probably going away, because we text message now,
Mhm.
and we're used to like the 1 or 2 liner message, and then follow up, and then, response, follow up, response. And so, you have to adapt and evolve. But I do think communication has definitely changed in the way we can communicate with people. And then with that, some things have been lost. I've talked with attorneys here, and I'll be like, well, did you tell Mr. So and so this?
Mm.
I emailed him, or I portaled him, or, did
As
you
my
call him?
brother-in-law would.
Yeah. Did you call? And the reason I say that is, did you call, is because, certain communications don't lend themselves well to just texting, email. You need to be there, and you need to kind of think about how the recipient of the communication is going to feel about it. And,
Well,
I
I'd like to
called,
share. Go
I
ahead.
called somebody yesterday, a client of ours, just to make sure they were doing all right, because I knew that we had reached a milestone in their case, and I knew it was an emotional ride, and just wanted to make sure they were okay.
Well, piggybacking off of that, and I didn't mean to interject, I wanted to share a story about communication that I witnessed with you. And this was years ago. And it's kind of funny because anytime anyone says, Gerard Virga, your husband, I kind of cringe a little because I go, oh dear. Yes, when you practice family law, obviously there's an adverse party, or, you never know. I mean, what maybe transpired as far as, oh no, you beat me in court, or this happened, or, obviously going back to the emotions. So, anyway, usually I brace myself because I don't know. Obviously, you have a great reputation and you're very good at what you do. However, there's lots of different variables. So, anytime, someone will say, hey, is your husband that lawyer? So we were in the grocery store. I remember this was years ago, and someone said, hey, wait, isn't Gerard your husband? And so I'm like, yes, like right in front of the eggs. And before I knew it, a little girl ran around the corner and she just hugged you. And well, she wasn't that little. I would say probably maybe a preteen or so. And like, what's going on here? And I remember they were just in tears and they said, you saved my life. Thank you so much. Like you got me away from, the parent that unfortunately and just sadly was abusive, and they weren't in a good place. And, it gives me goosebumps to this day because you personally got to see that good. And, and that particular case, going back to the communication, I know that you take all of your cases with you in your heart, but there are certain ones that stand out. And I think that was one of them as well. And that really keep that in the back of my mind when I see how tired you are, and I see, honey, you have to take your vitamins. Stop drinking soda. You have to, and I'm, trying to keep you healthy, but I see that how driven you are when you're, in the recliner until 4 a.m. plugging away because, and I often think about that young lady that came up to you, and I see her updates on social media now, and she's in college and she's doing great. But the point is that in family law, I think sometimes there can be a negative connotation. Oh, divorce and this and that. And, obviously not everyone's 100% happy at the end because no matter
There's
what,
no winners. There's no winners in divorce. I
exactly.
say that every day. No one wins. If I could, a win would be me taking some kind of a magic wand and hitting you and your spouse over the head with it, and saving a marriage. If we could save a marriage, that's my first goal. That's usually where I start out with, Are you sure? Are you absolutely positive? Is there anything I can do to help you not go through this? Because like my services are, or my skill set is much better use saving a marriage than tearing one apart if I
Mhm.
can save it. And that might be through a postnuptial agreement. It might be through experience. And unfortunately, in our society, a lot of times people come in here with like the grass is greener kind of view. And when I explain to them the realities of time sharing and, starting over and, you shouldn't stay in a marriage just for the financial reasons, right?
Right.
It's not, maybe,
For leaving the dirty underwear on the floor in the bathroom or
yeah, yeah, things like that that are not really good grounds, for it. And if we can save it, let's save it. Let's save it by all means. If I've had cases where we're down to the final hearing and it looks like there's a chance to save it. And if I see that chance and my client, agrees to give me that opportunity, I'm going to try to save it, man. Let's save the damn thing. Let's not have it.
absolutely.
Let's not go down this road if we can avoid it. And, there's tools out there in our toolbox that, sometimes people just forget we have, like
That's right.
postnuptial agreements. Hey, it's a rocky spot. No one wants to be left in the cold. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen in the event this does not work out. Can we put a postnuptial agreement in place and send you to counseling for the next 6 months or a year and see if we can maybe, get this thing back on track? Marriages are, sometimes they have bumpy spots. Sometimes they have, short-term problems. And, sometimes people are going through things and, just throwing the towel in at the first sign of trouble is not always the right choice. So
I think
I try to talk,
I'm sorry.
I try to talk people out of it sometimes.
I think
you were talking about the grocery store incident.
Mhm.
My favorite incident that's funny, not quite as serious and as touching, you actually kind of got me choked up thinking about that one, was I went to the hospital and you were with me and when I was in the emergency room
I wanted to share this one, but I didn't want to get too personal. So yes,
and
this is a
they
great
were
one.
about to give me some sedatives. I think it was some morphine.
Yeah.
And as anybody's had morphine, the view gets smaller and smaller as the drug takes effect before you're
Mhm.
out like a light. And the last thing I saw or heard before the lights went out from the morphine was, "That's my divorce lawyer. Don't let him die." And I was like, "Wow, man, is this serious? Am I that bad off?" And then the lights were out. But I still remember that, like you can make a positive difference in people's lives. And
Mhm.
there are times where, that's, that's what you have to focus on. It is there's lots of lawyers that won't do family law or don't like family law because of the subject matter. But, trying to make a difference. And then if there's going to be an inevitable breakup, divorce, change, whatever's happening in your life, how can I help this person rebuild and get them into a position where they can rebuild their life and
Mhm.
be there for them and get them through this dark patch of their life because it's not a good thing to be in,
Mhm.
and get them somewhere where maybe they can be happy and they can start over and then maybe be a fruitful co-parent. And you got to be their lawyer and you need to be their friend and sometimes their life coach and everything else, and then realizing too that you don't have all the answers. So if they need therapy and counseling,
Yes.
recommending that, or if they need a financial advisor, trying to, point that out that, hey,
Mm.
I
And
don't endorse anybody, but you need to start looking on how to handle these things and, helping them and
I
trying to
really
build a relationship.
exactly. I really love what you said about going to the toolbox. And that was one of the many reasons that you wanted to start the Florida Family Law Attorney podcast, because you wanted to have people on that could share their expertise, their passion, how they could help individuals going through family law issues. And I think that I'm really proud of what you've done with this so far in that regard. I love that we've had mental health professionals on, that we've had forensic accountants, I think we have a PI next week. We have communication experts. I mean, the list goes on, coaching, you name it. But at the end of the day, if there's one person that listens to one of these episodes and says, hey, wow, that's a really great suggestion with my co-parenting and it will help the kids, or so going back to that toolbox, and for people to know that when they are facing a family law issue, because it is more common than people think, that there is a village and, like you said, a toolbox and people there to help. There's so many resources now with technology, with mental health, with and you just have to ask, and we're happy to provide any of that for you, and there's no shame and needing that help. And there's no shame in that at all. So I think that was really well said. Well, I'm going to shift it a little bit. We talked about some of, your highlights with your professional kind of, wins as far as cases and whatnot. I would like to know, what was your proudest professional moment that didn't involve winning a case? I know that I've witnessed in our marriage and, even just the past couple of years, some really incredible things you've done outside of the courtroom. But what's something that you've been really proud of that's occurred in your life on a personal note, whether it has to do with the law firm or the podcast or the family law section of the Florida bar, anything you'd like to share?
I would think that, proudest, one of the proudest moments, of my professional life is working with the attorneys at the office, particularly one that works here who, I've known since she was in law school, and watching her develop and getting to play a role in her development as a lawyer and being there to guide her where I could and watching that and taking part in that and feeling like maybe, you're passing something on that a little bit
Now you're going to make me cry.
of you, when you hang it up, finally you retire, that, maybe there's a little bit of that that goes on.
Yes.
And then, honestly, it's kind of rewarding because, now we have conversations and sometimes I'm like, well, who's the master and who's the learner, right? Like, like you're teaching me something new or
Hmm.
you're hanging, you're holding your own and we're going back and forth with it. And, yeah, that's, kind of a legacy you can leave behind and be proud of. And, I think that's good. I think that's probably professionally, a high point. Personally, it's, putting everything into my kids and seeing their personal achievements.
Hmm.
And, like you said, sometimes I'm the pragmatic parent or I'm the time crunched parent, but, seeing them succeed in things that as a person didn't get to succeed at or doing better than you, I think that's what every parent really wants. And so, like, how you can't, like, that's got to be the highest achievement in your life, is watching your kids exceed your expectations and growing into the adults that they're going to be and what they're going to offer the world. So that's, personally and professionally.
Absolutely. I think it always comes full circle without a doubt. And I know I personally, being your wife and working here at the office as well and seeing you as a teacher and as a mentor. And a lot of people don't know that about you, is that you used to be a teacher. And obviously I get to see it
In another life. In
in another
another life.
but I know it's something that you enjoy, and those of you that know Gerard know how much he loves history in particular. And as my very bright and very beautiful stepdaughter is studying for her AP exams, of course, being a teenager, she's not going to give dad credit where it's due, like, oh, he actually helped me. But seeing you mentor, not only obviously helping our children, but, when I see you mentoring other, whether it be a young attorney, a high school student that comes through getting ready for a mock trial, I see it firsthand. And one thing I will say about you, and I tell people this all the time, your ambition is one of the things that I was the most attracted to. But it's one of those things where here we
It's like, I don't know if that's a compliment or what.
and then here one of the things like, okay, well, here we are on a Saturday morning, and it's like, I'm questioning that.
Be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you ask for.
Exactly. But my point being is that, I see how you put aside the time, not only for your clients, but for, like you said, a young attorney fresh out of law school that you watched her develop, and she'll do something and you'll go, yes, and you'll from behind the scenes, because, I see how proud you are. And many people don't see that side of you. And I made the comment earlier before you were talking with that other attorney on your previous podcast. You said something along the lines of, what was it about? Oh, I've come to a blank now. It was about mentoring and just how you like to see everyone evolve and come around. And I said, I wish that we could have a camera and somebody could see you at the house and they could see the drive and everything you put in and the late night phone calls and the pacing. And but you call, you check in, and I don't know. But I mean, I could always go on and on about how great you are. So I guess
Well,
I could also talk about how you get on my nerves. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I'll say that for another episode. But I was going to say was, with it, you know, like you were talking about, like the mock trial with the high school student, I had the benefit of, great parents. I had the benefit of going to Cumberland and Birmingham, and That's a real big trial advocacy school, and I was on the trial team there, and we won. I think it was the national quarterfinals. Got into the quarterfinals when I was there, and I was on that team. And we had a trial coach who was very hard on us, and he would work us. And I don't think he ever said a kind or positive word, but he pushed us. So there's a lot of people who've donated a lot of time in their life to me, and to my personal advancement or my professional advancement. So giving back and watching a teenager, being able to do a cross examination
Hmm.
and then watching him try it out on his mom, then watching the mom fire back with, "You were told to take the trash out this morning, correct? You were told to have it out by 6 a.m., correct? In fact, you get $5 a week for taking the trash out, correct? I went to work at 9 and the trash was in the side yard, correct?" And watching them play back and forth with the cross examination, it's fun. Passing on skills is always fun, and learning. And I don't care who it is that you're around, you can always learn something new from them too in the process.
Absolutely. So, speaking of cross examination, isn't it true that you've cross examined your wife in marital spats?
We try to learn. I think in law school, I think we actually had a professor who mentioned leave it at the door when you go home, but it's kind of like an instinct that when you're, in a spat or, you've learned these tools to hunt down the truth.
I think I've been guilty of saying, "Don't cross examine me, counselor."
Yeah. And, and
I'll start with, "I didn't go to law school, but I know what's going on. I know my
yeah,
rights."
yeah, it's not something to be proud of, but it definitely happens.
Especially with teenagers.
Yeah, the cross examination will inevitably come out. I think that's just, because I don't think a lot of people realize this. And you're trained, at school they teach you, or your first job they teach you. But over time, like when you're in court, a lot of times I'm not thinking, I don't have time to think about it, or I don't have all the questions written out.
Sure.
And so your mind just kicks into, doing it.
Absolutely.
And it's like second nature. So yeah, it happens. I apologize to you and to
No,
the kids for your cross examination that you've been subjected to from time to time. But it's,
we'll forgive you. We'll forgive you. I was very nervous and reluctant to appear in your podcast, and obviously you have esteemed, distinguished guests that are so knowledgeable and experts, and have just these great just credentials. And I was nervous, and I still am, but I know that I've had girlfriends and friends. They say, "Hey, can I just ask Gerard a really quick question?" Hey, hey,
and that's that. I hear that all day long. I just have a really quick question.
it's a
I
really
should
quick
probably have
question.
out a shirt like made that says I just got one question or really quick question. I'm
Well,
usually
and
even
so
at work on my way to the restroom or getting a glass of our Coke, some Coke out the refrigerator. And
exactly.
hey, I got one question. I got a quick question.
Exactly. So I really wanted to come on because I really wanted to be able to have the opportunity to ask a couple of questions that people have asked me. And like you said about having the t-shirt, I wish I could have the hoodie that goes over that says, "I'm not giving legal advice. We must perform a conflict check." With that being said, moving forward, I did want to ask you some questions that commonly come up, but I also wanted to ask you like some more fun questions, if that's all right with you.
Okay.
Just to lighten it up. So, what is your favorite legal movie?
My favorite legal
And
movie.
I think I know the answer to this, but
It's going to be A Time to Kill.
yep.
Um, This is a funny story. I was in community college. I went to Gulf Coast Community College to save on some money before going off to university because I knew I kind of wanted to probably do some higher level education. And I came from a working class home, and I needed to stretch my dollars and aid and everything I got to get through my schooling. So, I was not knowing really what I was going to do with my life. I was kind of in the, trying to figure it out. I knew I liked history, but I didn't really know what to do. So I was sitting on my buddy's bed at his house in his room, typical college kids,
Be careful what
and
you
watching A Time to Kill. And he gave the closing statement, Matthew McConaughey in that movie. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I can do this. This is what I want to do. And so that movie, when I see that movie, it reminds me of that. And then sometimes that movie's gotten very hard for me to watch now because I'm a parent.
Absolutely.
And, and it really deals with some horrible, a horrible crime. But watching that movie, sometimes if the closing statement, if I'm doubting myself, if, my passion maybe is waning a little bit, I'm getting run down, sometimes I'll just watch the clip of the closing and try
Hmm.
to bring myself back to my why. Why did I do this in the first place? And the way in that closing statement, he was able to tell that story and take these people who were obviously just diametrically opposed, made their mind up, and tell the story in a way that moved them not only up here, but moved them really here, is something that, really shaped my life. And I still think about that a lot because even though it's not like the movies and we're not having a week long trial in most cases, how can I tell my story, my client's story, and how can I get the listener to really get to know them and relate to them,
It's really
and
beautiful.
and trigger that sense of justice for them. So, Time to Kill, great movie if you haven't seen it.
One of the things that well, one of the many things I love about you, I love how you'll take clips of certain movies and those that work here at the firm and they know that we have a Friday morning huddle. And one of the things you'll do is put on a little some of the clips I think you want to put on. We know we can't because, of course there's, HR and things of that nature. But, there's certain clips from whether it be the Wolf of Wall Street or something like that we can't put up. But I do love when you put the inspiring, whether it be like a Steve Jobs quote or somebody speaking about basically inspiring you. Are there any other movies or people that come to mind that have really inspired you personally along your career? Something that you're like your go to when you're kind of maybe feeling down? I mean, I know the answer to this because I hear your YouTube videos blaring across the living room. But is there anything you would like to share as far as who inspires you or what your go to is? I know,
You're talking about fiction movies that do this?
yeah, fiction, nonfiction, anything that that really inspires you that you like to share that people may not know about.
Well, fiction movies, just fun movies. I like Rocky because it's,
I don't
about a
see your
fight.
Rocky as Sammy would say, your Rocky doll back there.
Yeah, the kids know what movies and things I'm into, and they like to bring little whatnots to the office. I try to display them here. But you know, Ro I really, Rocky, I think the first one is, especially like, coming up, you're up against he's up against the champion, obviously. He's trying not to just get knocked down. I think there's a lot of people in life, especially going through a divorce, that are just trying not to get knocked down.
Mhm.
Um, and, I think, going the distance. And then, the great thing about that movie too that I always take with me is you have the champion who's doing the business promoting and they're not taking it serious. And then you have the contender Rocky who is up before the sun, grinding, drinking the 5 eggs out of a cup and, doing that. And I think that movie, obviously that movie was out when I was a small child. I think that may have been the first movie I ever went to see in the theater with my mom as a baby. And you can outwork anybody, but you got to want it and you got to have the drive to want it. I like that. I think that's really something people can take from it. Like you can be up against anybody, but if you work hard enough and you keep focused at it and you're willing to make the sacrifices that it takes, you can go up against the best and you won't get knocked down. You can go the distance. And sometimes life is about just going the distance, holding your head up high. So I like that. On a fun note, I like Top Gun. I like the dogfight scenes in Top
Well,
Gun.
let me pause you there, and I don't mean to interject, but it's funny when you brought up Rocky, I was thinking about you had, like, out of county court this, I think, last week, and you were up until, like, 3 a.m. prepping for a trial, then you had to wake up, I think, at 5 to drive over to Pensacola or something, and I'm sleeping, I hear the Top Gun music going up, and I'm like, "What? Am I dreaming? Like, what is happening?" And I realized that you had set the alarm and you have the Top Gun intro music going, and I'm laughing because I'm going, "That is my husband, without a doubt." And then, of course, I had to get up, turn it off, shake you awake, and tell you that you had court, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's definitely my husband." But you got up. But, yeah, the fact that you had it set, that
Well, I like the dogfight scenes because, I think they're obviously some of the greatest movie scenes of all times. But I also like, some of the stuff like, that they're don't ever leave your wingman. Like, if you're working as a team, to do this, at maneuvering, while I'm not flying a fighter jet, there's maneuvering in a case. Do I file this at this time? Do I wait?
Mhm.
Do I pursue this at this time? Positioning, doing those things like they're obviously flying planes at, Mach 2 or whatever. So my job is not as entertaining maybe, but lining up the strategy of that,
You mean like
getting
Kenny
them in
Rogers?
position, setting up the questions where I get them into a position where that maybe they'll admit this, or if they're not going to be honest, I have the documents lined up where I can get them in the position
Mhm.
to point this out. Those are my two. And then when Top Gun 2 Maverick came out and he had the Goose's son with him,
Oh, yeah.
you know, that goes back to the mentoring. How do you no one taught me how to be a teacher or a mentor or to do these things. And, how do you do that? And I think that was one of the things that he was faced in the movie. And I also think it's something that we all face in life. Like, whether it's professional colleague that you're, training and you're mentoring and you want to see them succeed and actually be better than you. One of my favorite parts in that movie is, Maverick gets in position. He's like, come on, kid, take the shot, take the shot, take the shot. Cause he wants him to hit him. He wants the kid to score,
Yeah.
um, you
And
know,
it's like you were talking about the other attorney, and I remember one of the very first times that you went to court together, and I remember you coming home saying, "Oh, you should have seen her in that cross-examination," and you were just so proud. Like, I mean, it was just like your proudest moment, and that was a really beautiful thing.
it's, yeah, I mean, another great one from that one is that I took with me because I'm always looking for one liners
Mhm.
as it's not the plane, it's the pilot in the box or the person in the box. And I think sometimes for law that may be true. It's not necessarily the case, but it's the lawyer in there and what they're going to do next and what they're willing to do and how far they're willing to push it and maneuver and and to do that. And that individual spirit, that person brings to it. So, and I thought that was a good one that I took from the movie. But I'm an analogy guy. I can watch a movie about
Well,
anything
that's
and
what I was gonna
pick up
say.
analogies.
I think that, and I was thinking too when you were talking about strategy, and I was thinking about how you play that Kenny Rogers song about when to fold 'em and all that, and so I was thinking, we should do like a top 10 family law playlist, like movies, music, what motivates you, but I was thinking about that, and then with the kids and the Hercules Going the Distance,
Yeah.
when they play that one, so, but I know that, we're running short on time, and I just wanted to thank you for letting me take over your podcast and asking you questions. If it's okay with you, I would like to appear again. I would like to ask you some more questions that, some of the other baseball moms have asked me on the baseline where I wear my hoodie that say I'm not a lawyer. I can't about this, but maybe just some more general questions. And I think it's important for people to know that, yes, you have this incredible reputation of being an extraordinary and experienced family law attorney, but most importantly, you're a husband, you're a dad, you are, at the dinner table reprimanding the kids, doing the same things that we all are, but not reprimanding, you know what I mean? But my point being is that, I think that it's important for people to know that you are approachable and that you're willing to answer, some questions that they may have. And, that was the whole point of creating this podcast is having that outlet. And as you mentioned again, that toolbox and being able to have that support and that communication. So thank you again for letting me take over your podcast. And I hope to do it again soon. Do you have any questions for me or anything else you would like to say to wrap up episode 15?
Think we should do one. Maybe we should do an episode at some point on cross examination tactics, and I can let you be the witness if you'll do it.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll have some of the younger attorneys come on too. So yeah, that would be fun. Let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for having me on and thank you for your Saturday morning.